Okay, welcome everybody. I'm going to be doing some narration on the Frankenstein PowerPoint that we worked on. Now, the first thing I want to tell you is that what I'm not putting on here is some of the stuff from the author's introduction and from the letters in chapters 1 to 3. We did that in class already, so it should be in your notes. If there's anybody that's lost those notes, I'd love to be able to help you out with that, but I'm not going to go over them here. Most of that information you will find in Frankenstein worksheet number 1. That's where I ask you the questions, and you should be able to find the answers in your notes if you were there when we went over that stuff. We're going to start though with chapter 4. And when we're looking at chapter 4 now, this is when Frankenstein is at the university and he's spending a lot of time learning about stuff. He becomes kind of obsessed with the origins of life. Where does life come from? How does it begin and what causes it to end? And the cool thing about that is that these are questions to which we still don't really have the answers. I mean, we know where life comes from, like in the sense of like where babies are born and stuff like that, but we don't really know still if we're talking about life coming into being out of nothing. We don't know how that happens. If we put a bunch of material together and try to create life in there, we still don't have the ability to do that. And so these are questions to which we still don't know the answers. And for 2 years, he doesn't go home, and he's engaged, he says, heart and soul in his studies. Kind of like you guys right now, kind of staying at home and engaged, I'm hoping, heart and soul in your studies. In any case, though, is this obsession, which is what we talked about before, is one of the themes of the book, is he obsessed? Or is this just dedication? I don't really mind what side you come down on that, but it's certainly one of the questions to figure out here is whether or not he's obsessed and this is dangerous, or whether it's just a good, dedicated student trying to learn things. In any case, though, he is obsessed or dedicated to trying to find these answers. And so he is... he's trying to search through these answers. Right, all right. And are there certain things that mankind is not meant to know? This comes back to the subtitle of the novel, which is The Modern Prometheus. Prometheus is a character from Greek mythology who stole fire from the gods and gave it to mankind. And so he's seen as this prototypical, like almost a savior figure where he gives stuff that mankind needs that the gods didn't want them to have. And so the gods punish him by tying him to a rock and sending an eagle to eat his liver every single day. And since he's a titan, he can't die, and so that's how they punish him. And so he's become kind of this prototypical character, this archetype of this person that seeks to share secret or forbidden knowledge. And so that's why we talk about the modern Prometheus is Frankenstein, is the scientist. He's this guy that is trying to find secret knowledge that maybe the gods don't really want you to have. Now, what is that knowledge? That's actually a really decent question. In chapter 4, it says that he discovers it. He discovers the secret of how to create life out of something that is not alive. He said, the way he says is, a sudden light broke in upon me, a light so brilliant and wondrous, yet so simple, that I was surprised that among so many men of genius that I alone should be reserved to discover so astonishing a secret. Now, I want you to notice the hubris here. Hubris is a term for just pride, like off the charts pride. And it is something that shows up in a lot of drama, especially a lot of like early Greek drama. The idea of thinking that you are greater than the gods even. And you notice Frankenstein's hubris, where he believes that he is something special, better than others, somehow that he has been reserved, this knowledge has been reserved for him. And so hubris is definitely one of the themes here. And now his secret of how to create life, people always want to know that. And Walton, the guy who's telling the story to, he asks him, so how do you do it? And he says, no, I can't tell you that. Well, why not? He says, well, because hear my whole story and you'll hear why this is something you shouldn't know. This is something no one should know. He wants this knowledge to die with him, because he says this is something that no one should know. I shouldn't have learned this in the first place, which goes back to the whole Prometheus idea of that this is hidden knowledge that no one should know. It's also a very clever writer's trick, because obviously Mary Shelley doesn't know the secret to that either. So by saying that Frankenstein knows the secret but won't tell, that prevents her from having to tell, which is a very clever way of being able to tell the story without having to tell the central story behind it. It's also one of the major differences between the novel and pretty much every movie version, because while it works very well as a literary trick, if you're making a movie about somebody that brings something to life that wasn't alive, you have to show that scene because that's the central and important scene. And if you're showing that scene, you need to show how it's happening. And so every single movie version has them creating life in some way. Whether I've seen a lot of them involved with lightning, some of them involved with like magnetism and stuff like this. Whatever. But understand, none of those come out of the novel because the novel does not tell you how life is created. In any case, though, Frankenstein talks about that he's going to do this and he knows how, so he starts to build a man. And he builds this man larger than a normal man would be. He says he wants it to make it about 8 feet tall and everything else proportionately large. Now, why? Well, because it's easier to work with something when it's large. It means that he doesn't have to deal with the tiny, tiny places where nerve endings would be, and instead he can deal with larger stuff. And as he writes this, he says that he thinks how great it would be that a new species would bless me as its creator and source. Now, there's 2 things I want you to notice about that line. First of all, he's thinking about a species. That's important later on because he's not thinking about creating just one creature. He's thinking about creating a race. So later on, when he has the opportunity to create a race, he deliberately says that he doesn't want to do that. And it's almost like he's forgotten that that was originally his intention. And the second reason is it lets you see that he wants to be a god. I mean, who is the being that created a species and then was blessed as its creator and source? That's God. So he wants to be a god. And so you can see the hubris behind that. That idea of overarching pride beyond the pale. So he's creating life where there was no life. Now that's an important thing a distinction. He's not bringing him back from the dead. The movie actually has a line to this. This is a 1931 Universal film. Has a line from this, making that very explicit. He's not bringing the creature back from the dead. The creature was never alive. He is bringing life to something that never was alive. He hopes someday to be able to renew life to the dead, but for now, bringing life from nothing is the best he can do. He does take the material from graves and from charnel houses and from dissecting rooms, but he also specifies that he gets it from the slaughterhouse. So a lot of the materials come from dead human beings, but some of them actually comes from dead animals. Slaughterhouse is like a butcher shop, basically. So he's getting this material from a lot of different places and putting together this man. And along the way, he says he feels a little bit guilty about not writing his family. He's become so obsessed with creating this creature that he hasn't been keeping in contact with his family. He feels a little bad for that, but he keeps at it anyway. And that's when we get to the end of chapter 4. And when we start chapter 5, he has actually finished creating this creature. So in chapter 5, at the beginning of chapter 5, Frankenstein has finally created his creature and he succeeds in bringing it to life. And when he comes to life, almost immediately, Frankenstein looks at the thing and he's instantly horrified by what he has done. He's been planning it and excited about it for all this time, and then he's suddenly horrified. He says he had selected the creature's body parts to make him look beautiful, but now he wonders how he ever could have thought that. He specifies that the creature's yellow skin barely covers his muscles. Wait, yellow skin? Not green? In all of the movies, Frankenstein is green, right? But no, not so in the book. In the book, he is in fact yellow. So let's fix that picture and make that yellow. Somebody said when we put this up before, he looks like a character from The Simpsons. Maybe a little bit, sure. But there's some other differences as well. For one thing, it specifies he has long black hair, so it doesn't have that flat-headed look that we are used to seeing in the movies. And the one feature that Frankenstein mentions the most is the fact that he has these watery eyes. The watery eyes that are almost the same color as the bone sockets behind them. So you can kind of get a sense of this almost dead-looking eyes, like eyes that look like they're just like not even totally alive. And those eyes are what really creep him out a lot. But in any case, though, he He has created this creature. It's now breathing. It's alive. And the first breath the monster takes, what does Frankenstein do? He runs away. He runs away in terror. He flees away and he goes into his bedroom. He runs to his bedroom and he kind of paces back and forth for hours, not sure exactly what to do. He's not sure whether he should destroy this thing or if he can. And eventually, as he's pacing around in his bedroom, he falls asleep. And he has this nightmare. He has this nightmare about Elizabeth, this girl that he loves, that he grew up with and that he loves. And he has a nightmare about meeting her, and then when he reaches for her, she suddenly changes into the corpse of his dead mother. Now, this is a lot of his focus has been on death, but you see how this focus on death has now become kind of a horror of death, which is very different. Frankenstein talks about that he had never been afraid of death before. It had just been another part of human life. But now he's kind of horrified by it. That's kind of been brought about because of seeing this creature breathe. When he wakes up, though, he wakes up because he gets a sense that something is watching him. And he wakes and he finds the creature holding aside the bed curtain and staring at him. And this, of course, creeps him out a lot, as it would creep out anybody to have somebody staring at them. But you got to remember something, though. This thing was just brought to life a few hours ago. Now, when any of us were brought to life, it was years before we could get up on our feet or walk around, or certainly before we could recognize our creators. And apparently, he already is recognizing Frankenstein as his creator. And so he's trying to make some noises with his mouth, trying to say something. Frankenstein is freaked out and runs away. And the monster is just like, hey, wait. Like, he's not saying that, but he can, like, holding out his arm like it's trying to get him to not leave. This shows that the creature is very strong and very intelligent to get up on its feet that quickly. But of course, this freaks out Frankenstein even more, and so he runs out of the house. This is a theme, by the way, that becomes important later, that he's continually just running away from this creature. He runs away, he goes to the courtyard, which is basically like the front yard, only it was like surrounded by a fence. So he's out there, and he waits there until morning. Now, he justifies his actions in doing this by expressing how horrible and ugly the creature is. He says, who could ever have any other reaction from this creature that's just such a terrifying-looking mummy? But at this point, again, I think we need to look at this as the unreliable narrator, because I don't think we're meant to sympathize with Frankenstein here. We're meant to sympathize with the creature, because he has abandoned his creation. He's created this thing, and then he just left the monster to try to figure things out on its own. Now, try to imagine what life would be like for you if, when you were an itty-bitty baby, your parents had just kind of abandoned you to just kind of figure things out on your own. Well, you probably wouldn't have turned out so well, right? Frankenstein is like this spoiled little child that has made a mess. And because he can't fix this mess, he runs and hides from it. And he hopes that if he can't see it, the mess will just kind of go away on its own. Now, you guys are all old enough to realize that that is not how life is, and you're supposed to be identifying with the creature here, not with Frankenstein, because this is really Frankenstein's sin. His sin is not just playing God, but being a God that abandons his creation. We are meant to sympathize with the creature, because for the Romantics, they would say that we are also creations of a God that has abandoned us. You see, it was a running theme in Romanticism. The idea of humanity is left without any guidance. They would look at the old stories of God, like sending prophets or sending miracles or something like this, and they would say, where is that? Why isn't that happening anymore? And they would say, well, God has abandoned us. They've abandoned humanity without leaving us any guidance anymore. And so that is part of the theme of this novel. And that theme is really shown with the creature. But right now we're still in Frankenstein's point of view. So we follow Frankenstein as Frankenstein, when it comes to the daytime, he leaves the house, he goes out into the town, still just kind of not sure what to do, wandering around trying to figure out what he ought to do in a situation like this. And he runs into his old friend Henry Clerval. Now, Henry Clerval, you remember, is a friend from Geneva. Clerval's father has finally let him go to the university to study as he always wanted to. Now, Clerval is glad to see him, but he immediately can tell that something is bothering Frankenstein. And he tries to ask him what's wrong without, again, propriety. He can't really push and shove too much. He needs to, like, let Frankenstein talk on his own. And Frankenstein clearly doesn't want to talk about it. And so after catching up for a little while, Victor brings Clerval back to his home, and he pauses for a moment before he goes up the stairs because he's afraid if the creature is still there, it will freak Clerval out, and it'll also freak Victor out because Victor won't know how to handle that. So he goes up the stairs by himself first, and the creature is gone. The apartment is empty. Now, we are not supposed to think what Victor does, because Victor is immediately relieved and filled with joy. Oh, thank goodness that monster isn't here. And he immediately calls the creature my enemy. My enemy is gone, which is weird, because right now, what has the creature done? He's done nothing. But immediately, Frankenstein is calling him his enemy, which is a weird thing because later on he has reasons to believe that the creature is his enemy, but right now he does not. So that makes you wonder whether calling him an enemy immediately might have helped to create him into an enemy. And the other thing is that Frankenstein does not wonder, at least not right here, what the reader probably does wonder, which is, well, okay, if the creature is gone, then where has it gone? Because it didn't just vanish into thin air. It's gone somewhere. We don't actually get the answer to that for a number of chapters. We don't know where the creature has gone. And the weird thing is, Frankenstein doesn't seem to wonder. Now, what does happen is that Clerval continues to ask him what's going on until Frankenstein swoons and falls ill. He falls in a fit, and he's sick for actually several months. This becomes a running theme with Frankenstein, where he'll fall over sick and be out of it for several months. This time, Clerval is there to take care of him. So he takes care of him. He's answering his mail, sending messages back to his family. Frankenstein never seems to wonder where the creature has been all this time. Wherever it is, the creature is alone without any guidance for the entire winter, because that's how long it is that Frankenstein is sick. Remember, he creates the monster in November, and it isn't until March that we come to the end of chapter 5. So he's been sick all this time, and we have no idea where the creature is. Later, we're going to find out what has happened to the creature, but that won't come until we get to the middle of the bullseye when we're getting things from the creature's point of view. When Frankenstein finally is better, Clerval gives him a letter from Elizabeth, and that brings us to chapter 6. Now, in chapter 6, we get this letter from Elizabeth, and through the letter, we can learn about Frankenstein's family. Now, this is another rather clever literary writer's trick because it keeps Mary Shelley from having to do what's called an info dump, which she just kind of dumps all this information on us at once. So, by talking to Frankenstein about his family, it lets us also learn about his family. And the first member of his family she talks about is his little brother. His little brother is named Ernest. Ernest Frankenstein is 16 years old. He wants to be a soldier, and they mention that he is full of activity and spirit. And really, Ernest is probably, of all the characters in his family we meet, he's the one we learn the least about. Ernest Frankenstein is just kind of mentioned a couple of times. He doesn't have a whole lot to do in the novel. And a lot of people have wondered why exactly. I mean, was Mary Shelley originally hoping to write like a sequel to this? That seems unlikely for the time period. They didn't really do a lot of sequels back then. But in any case, we hear about this guy Ernest. We don't see a lot more about him. Then we also meet Justine Moritz. Now, Justine Moritz isn't a member of his family. She's a poor girl from a bad family. She specifies she had a rather mean mother that kind of blamed her for things that weren't really her fault. She's had a very hard life, but she's been very patient, and she tends to take upon herself the blame for things that are not her fault. That becomes important later on. And the last member of his family that we meet is William Frankenstein. William Frankenstein is an adorable little boy. He's about 5 or 6 years old, apparently, and he's just darling and precious and darling, and that's really the most we hear about him. He becomes important later, so make sure that you keep an eye on these characters so you know who all of these characters are. So, when we finish with this letter, the other things that happen in chapter 6 is that Frankenstein basically is tired of science anymore. He wants to kind of get rid of it, but it's his obligation to introduce Clerval to his professors because that's how universities worked back then. You needed to be able to be introduced by people so that they would be able to teach you. And so he introduces Clerval to his professors, and when he does, they all praise Frankenstein because of his great accomplishments that he's been able to do here at the university. Of course, they don't know about the real accomplishment that he's made of creating life. But Frankenstein is kind of pained by this. He doesn't want to think about science anymore. So instead, he starts taking the humanities classes with Clerval. He takes classes on different languages and stuff like this, and history and stuff. And then with one thing and another year passes. And again, we're still supposed to wonder, where on earth is the creature? What has the creature been doing as an entire year has passed now? Frankenstein doesn't seem to wonder this, though. But they come home one day in the next May, and they find a letter from Victor's father. And that brings us into chapter 7. In chapter 7, it starts off with this letter from Victor's father in which he tells him some terrible news. William, that adorable little boy, has been murdered. He was apparently strangled to death. Someone choked the little child to death. And it looks like it was apparently a robbery because he had a valuable piece of jewelry that was stolen. It's a piece of jewelry that was in the shape of a miniature portrait of his mother. Some people make a lot out of that, the idea that he was killed for the picture of his mother. But anyway, Elizabeth blames herself for that because she was the one that let William wear that miniature, which apparently was a temptation for whoever killed him. And so she blames herself for his death now. The father urges Victor to come home to Geneva immediately. Just come right home. And Victor does. He immediately shows the letter to Clerval and then goes and gets horses so that he can go. And then the rest of chapter 7, it shows him basically going there. And he goes to Geneva, travels very quickly until he reaches just outside of Geneva, where he arrives after dark. And what that means is the town gates are shut, so he can't get into there until the morning when they open the gates. And so he has to spend the night at a village, which was not very unusual during that time period. And he decides, as long as he's out there anyway, he's going to visit the place where his brother was found, or his brother was killed, according to the message that he received from his father. And there's this big, huge lightning storm. Lightning is a theme here in Frankenstein, which is probably one of the reasons why the movie ended up deciding that lightning would make a lot of sense as the thing that creates life. But again, that's not how it is in the novel. But lightning is definitely a theme, the idea of the kind of the chaotic nature of a thunderstorm. So he's watching this lightning storm, and he's thinking about his dead brother, when suddenly there's a flash of lightning that suddenly reveals the creature. He can see the creature in the distance, and immediately he recognizes it. Even though it's been over a year, and even though he's only seeing it in a flash of lightning, he recognizes the creature's form. And he calls it the wretch, the filthy demon to whom I had given life. Now again, this doesn't seem very fair because so far as we know, the creature hasn't done anything. But immediately Victor believes that this creature is the murderer. And again, we don't really know why Victor comes to that conclusion immediately. Why does he immediately believe that the creature is evil? Well, some people believe that this is because Victor sees that evil inside of himself, and he thinks that he took all of these bad parts of himself, the bad, ambitious parts that he considers evil, and made them into this creature. But that's kind of unfair, really. I mean, that's kind of projecting his own guilt onto this creature. Whatever, though, he does blame the creature immediately, even though as far as we know, the creature hasn't done anything. But before he can do anything, the creature climbs up the mountain with this ridiculous power and speed and disappears. And for the first time, Frankenstein now wonders, oh my goodness, what has this creature been doing for the last 2 years? And he wonders, is this its first crime? Or has it been doing all kinds of other terrible things while I wasn't looking? And he starts to feel a bit of guilt for it, as he should, because he figures that anything the creature has done is partly his fault because he created the creature. Anyway, the next morning he goes in to see his family, and he arrives at home and discovers that Justine has been arrested for the murder. Now, this surprised him a great deal, but the reason is that the picture jewelry that was the picture of Frankenstein's mother that was stolen from William, and wasn't found on his body. It was actually found in Justine's pocket. And even though that's great evidence that shows that she must have done it, Victor tells his brother Ernest and the others, no, 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 I know that she is innocent. I know that she has to be innocent. But he doesn't have any evidence, and he can't tell them about the creature. He believes that if he tells them about the creature, that they will think that he is crazy. Now, they probably would. He's probably accurate in thinking that. But at the same time, we wonder right now whether things would be a whole lot better if he had gone ahead and just told them right away. And this becomes another theme because he takes forever to actually tell anybody about this. He has the torture of the guilt of this in his own mind, and he never shares it with anybody until very, very late in the novel. The other thing to think is that even if he's not crazy, he might just be making up this story as a way to try to protect Justine. And so he thinks he won't be believed. So instead, he trusts in the justice of our laws to set Justine free. And like I said, at this point, I think we kind of question whether Victor is justified in staying silent here. Because if he knows that Justine didn't do this, and he knows who did, he really ought to tell them who did it. But again, at this point, my question is, why in the world does he think that? Because he has no evidence that the monster did any of these things. Only the presence of the monster in that area is the only thing that makes you think that he could have done it. But whatever, he trusts that the court is going to find her innocent. So the trial in the next chapter is what he calls a mockery of justice. Because the judges already believe that Justine is guilty, even before any evidence is presented. There are other facts against her besides the one thing that we mentioned. For one thing, she was out the whole night of the murder, and no one knows where she was. She can't really account for herself. She has no alibi. There's also a witness that saw her near the place where the murder happened. And she fell into hysterics when she saw the body of William. Now, that's something I want to point out for just a second, because that seems to me very flimsy evidence. But in Frankenstein, that shows up again and again as if it is credible evidence. As if when somebody sees the body of somebody that they loved and they see their dead body, if they fall into hysterics, that it shows that somehow they are guilty or responsible for this. Now, again, that seems to me a little bit crazy. I mean, of course, if you see somebody that you knew and you see them dead, you're going to get hysterical about it. That's normal reaction. But whatever, in Frankenstein, they treat that, in the novel Frankenstein, they treat that as if that's evidence for a crime. But the big evidence, of course, the main fact against her is the presence of that jewelry picture in her pocket. And Justine cannot explain it. She says that she knows that this is the biggest evidence against her, but that she has no ability to explain it. There's a paragraph that begins with the phrase, I know. I recommend that you read that on your own so that you guys can see what her problem is, because she has no idea how that could possibly have gotten there. Now, that's not good enough for the judges, though, and so they believe that she must have done it. And so Victor even says that if he hadn't been so sure that the creature did it, that he himself might think that Justine was guilty. Which begs the question then, so why is he so sure that the creature did do it? Because he has no evidence against the creature other than its existence and its presence in the area. Is this just prejudice? Is it because the creature is ugly? Is that the only reason that he thinks it is? Is it self-hatred because the creature, after all, is an extension of Victor? Is that all it is? He even assumes that the monster must have somehow framed Justine. Now, that would involve a whole lot of intelligence and forethought of this creature. And so he really believes this creature is capable of all of this evil wickedness, even though the creature has done nothing so far as Frankenstein knows. Elizabeth takes a stand herself, and she testifies of Justine's character and how she never would have even needed to steal anything from the family anyway, because anything she wanted, they would have just given her. But that actually doesn't help, because rather than having people realize that she actually didn't need to steal things, they think, oh, what an ungrateful person Justine is. Here's this wonderful family that gave her all these things and loved her, and she went ahead and stole from them and killed their child anyway. And so it doesn't actually help when Elizabeth gives her this. We We go on to Justine. Yes, there it is. Justine is condemned to death. And when she is condemned to death, Victor blames himself for this because he feels like it was really his fault because he created this creature. Now, should he blame himself for this? I mean, this is actually a kind of deep question because is it really his fault? Even if the monster is guilty, is it his fault just because he created the monster? I mean, he didn't make the monster evil, but he feels like it's his fault anyway. In the morning, they hear that Justine has confessed to the crime. Even then, Victor still doesn't believe it. He still believes that it wasn't her, it must have been the monster. Now, it turns out that he is right, but still, it shows that he is prejudiced that the monster had to have done it. What happened is that Justine, it turns out, has a confessor, like a priest, who tells her that if she will not confess, then she's going to go to hell. And so she's scared, so she confesses, even though she did not do it. But she confesses that she did it because she's afraid that if she doesn't confess, that she's going to go to hell. And she feels badly for doing that, for lying about that, but at that point, there's nothing she can do. And so the next day, she dies on the scaffold. She is hung to death. And Victor blames both her death and William's on the creature. Now in chapter 9, the whole family is mourning. The whole family is very, very sad, both for William and for Justine, even though some people do believe that Justine must have done it. Elizabeth is very sad for them both, but she also says that she feels sorry for the murderer. There's a paragraph on chapter 88 in the version of Frankenstein that has the monster on the cover. It starts, "When I reflect, my dear cousin, on the miserable death of Justine, I no longer see the world and its works as they were before appeared to me. Before I looked on the accounts of vice and injustice that I read in books or heard from others as tales of ancient days or imaginary evils. At least they were remote and more familiar to reason than to the imagination. But now misery has come home, and men appear to me as monsters thirsting for each other's blood. Yet I am certainly unjust. Everybody believed that poor girl to be guilty, and if she could have committed the crime for which she suffered, assuredly she would have been the most depraved of human creatures. For the sake of a few jewels, to have murdered the son of her benefactor and friend, a child whom she had nursed from its birth and appeared to love as if it had been her own. I could not consent to the death of any human being, but certainly I should have thought that such a creature was unfit to remain in the society of men. But she was innocent. I know. I feel she was innocent. You are of the same opinion, and that confirms me. Alas, Victor, when falsehood can look so like the truth, who can assure themselves of certain happiness? I feel as if I were walking on the edge of a precipice towards which thousands are crowding and endeavoring to plunge me into the abyss. William and Justine were assassinated, and the murderer escapes. He walks about the world free and perhaps respected. But even if I were condemned to suffer on the scaffold for the same crimes, I would not change places with such a wretch." So the interesting thing about that is at the end, you can see that she has sympathy for anyone that would need to live with having done this, with having killed this little child. In other words, she feels sympathy for the monster. Even though she doesn't know that it's the monster, she doesn't know the monster exists right now, but she feels sympathy for the monster, that he did this and would have had to live with that pain. But now notice Victor's reaction. He doesn't think of that at all. He thinks only of himself. He hears her talking about that and he thinks, oh, me, because I am the murderer. I am the one that have done this because I created the monster. It doesn't even occur to him that maybe he should feel sympathy for the creature. The creature to him is not worthy of any sympathy at all. Doesn't even occur to him. So the selfishness of Frankenstein ought to really strike you. Now we go to chapter 9. In chapter 9, we mostly have Frankenstein going out into nature to try to feel better. He feels terrible. He feels almost suicidal. But a lot of this shows romanticism, because in romanticism you have a lot of reverence for nature, a lot of caring about nature. And this whole chapter shows a lot of descriptions of mountains and trees and wind and stuff like this. And it does help Victor to feel a little better. And so Frankenstein continues in his wandering across the country in chapter 10. He walks out onto a glacier. Now, a glacier is a slow-moving river of ice, and this one is between two mountains. And they're real. They're out there. There's glaciers out there, and people do sometimes go out and walking on them. That's a real thing. But as he's out there, suddenly the creature approaches him, walking across the ice towards him. And so this is the first time that these two characters directly see each other and recognize each other. And Frankenstein's first reaction is anger. He starts shouting. He's filled with rage and hatred at this creature. And he has a paragraph beginning with "Devil!" I exclaimed. Go ahead and read that paragraph because it lets you see, first of all, the first thing he calls him is devil. That's the first word that he has called to his creature. That's significant because if you look at like the biblical God, the God that created human beings in the Bible and stuff like that, he also created the angels and the devils. And so he starts off by calling him a devil. Now, if you have a parent that immediately calls you a devil and then you become a devil, well, there's no surprise in that, right? And so there's something in that. Notice that Frankenstein wants to attack the creature, even though he still has no actual evidence that it has done anything wrong. He just thinks, he's ugly, he's a monster I created, he must have done this, and he's so sure he wants to go and rip it apart. Now notice the creature's patience. He could snap Victor's neck like a twig, but he holds back. And he's the calm, rational person. Frankenstein is the one filled with rage. The creature is calm and rational. And he tries to stop the madness. He tries to make him stop his anger. Tries to calm him down. He even covers his eyes. So he says, yeah, you don't want to look at me here. I will cover your eyes. And then the creature starts to speak. Is anyone surprised by that? Because the movies always make the monster mute, or at least speaking in only one or two halting words. There's a link there to a Saturday Night Live sketch that shows the monster reporting on the fires in California, which I thought was kind of cute. So you guys can certainly watch that if you can get that, because it's kind of fun. But the creature has a proposal for Frankenstein. He says that if he will do as he asks, he promises he will leave him and all humanity alone forever. But if you don't, he says that I will take my revenge on you because you've caused me nothing but pain. And I notice in this dialogue, the creature is appealing to Victor's goodness. He trusts that Victor has something good inside him, that he will not abandon him, even though he has very little evidence of that. And it shows that the creature just wants to be loved. He says, I was benevolent and good. It was misery that made me a fiend. Make me happy, and I shall again be virtuous. Now, what do you think about that? I mean, are people naturally good or evil? Or are people made good or evil by how they are treated? This is an age-old philosophical question. It's called nature versus nurture. It's one of the most important questions of philosophy and education. The creature asks Frankenstein to just hear him out. Just hear me out. He leads him to a little hut on the ice where the creature has been living, and he begins to tell him his story. And that's what starts up the rest of the book. We now are going to be entering the center of the bullseye, where we see the point of view from the monster's point of view.